kind introduction. So, I'm a computational social scientist. I'm not sure if you know what that means, but in our world, essentially, there are two different channels that you're trying to use to understand how humans behave, and you're trying to invent products that focus on solving some of those human issues over time. So that means in social sciences or in marketing, or if you think about you dealing with somebody in a face-to-face situation, a lot of it has got to do with personal intuition. It's got to do with how you get to understand somebody and how you talk to them. In computational social science, we only look at the evidence that you leave behind. We look at the shreds of transactions, the actions that you take over time, and nothing about what you say. It's only about the evidence that is really there to be able to understand what you do. So the idea behind today is to give you a brief journey. It's going to be a pretty fast journey, and it's going to be fairly quick as we just go through a number of the core constructs and some of the key ideas. At the end of the talk, I'll share with you a handful of tools. So for those, if you've got your camera, you can do a QR code, and if you've got access to custom GPTs or any of those kind of tools, you'll be able to access some of the capabilities, and we can have some fun with that. I've been lucky that I've been working with great companies in the country, so we've got an understanding as to how financial services and telecommunications, so some of those organizations operate, and also trying to see how things play out on the ground. So normally I'm Dr. Jay van Zyl from California, and I have to speak about the process of innovation, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to make it a lot easier. So what I want to start with is just all of the world's biggest companies today are driven and entirely built on the back of AI. There's a concept called the Magnificent Seven. That means that if you had to look at Microsoft and you look at Google with Alphabet, you look at Meta organization, you look at NVIDIA, you look at Tesla, all of these organizations that are the world's $1 trillion+ organizations are essentially creating their future almost entirely shaped around artificial intelligence. That means that the future is about how you're going to understand making money, saving money, and protecting money using alternative methods. So I want to just give you a glimpse of what some of that looks like.
I am a translator. Transforming text into creative discovery. Turning movement into animation. And infusing words with emotion.
台北是一个很棒的主办城市。
I am a healer. Exploring the building blocks that make us unique. Discovering new threats before they happen. And searching for the cures to keep them at bay. I am a visionary. Creating new medical miracles. And unlocking the secrets of our sun to keep us safer here on Earth. I am a navigator, finding a single moment in a sea of content.
We're announcing the next generation.
And the perfect setting for our most amazing stories. I am a creator, adding new dimensions to creative expression and reimagining our virtual selves. I am a helper, personalizing our surroundings.
Help me arrange the living room.
Harnessing the wisdom of a million programmers. And turning the real world into a virtual playground. I even how to write the script. Breathe life into the words and compose the melody.
That's just a glimpse of what's happening. And most of it is happening over here. So this is what Silicon Valley looks like for those who've not seen it from the air or seen it at all. Top left is San Francisco, and you've got about a 60 to 70 mile radius, or basically a spread of all of the world's richest companies agonizing over every single day how they're going to invent a product to dislodge what you are doing today. And this is really the story about today. There is a flip side to this, and that is that you can have fun also in South Africa and other places. So there's an enormous amount of innovation going on right here in this region, by the way. You know that in Johannesburg and in Cape Town, there are a bunch of AI startups. We're involved in a number of local communities where we're trying to get government support for a lot of the investments to train models and to prepare them for the continent, and especially for issues on the African continent from a scenario point of view. So let's just look at first, what is it? And I'm sure you've all done some reading about it. You might have tried it out. But let's just take you through a brief glimpse of the concept. The concept, first and foremost, is for you to try and to understand the role of the various players that are going to be exposed to what the new inventions are. If you had to think about you as an individual, and that means the tools that are personal productivity tools, or the things that are going to affect you about personal medicine, or the way that you consume music, the way you consume media, and everything that you do means that it is about a decision that you take as an individual that is just for you. By the time you look at a collective, it is the way that groups of people behave. So in marketing or in business sciences, you might call those segments, you might call those target groups, you might call them competitors, you might call them many things. But in the AI world, what we're trying to do is there a way to automatically figure out where competition is coming from, or where certain ideas are coming from, or how people are thinking about the world, and can you then create an AI that can help you to make better decisions? Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to decide how you recommend certain kind of inventions or certain kind of products to certain kind of customers. And then there's the issue around the society, and that is the anthropological perspective. And the anthropological perspective is fascinating. Because in a region like Southern Africa, or if you had to look at East Africa, or if you look at Europe, East-West, or the US, even in the US, there are pockets of these cultural groupings of how people really believe the world works. It's about the negativity, the positivity, the people who are optimists and pessimists, and a lot of that plays to how you see people communicate with each other. So what technology people agonize over, think about, reason about every single day is that, can I invent something, and can I create a new kind of intelligence that can influence these three types of situations? Can I create something that, if I want to reprogram a society, that I can do it reliably for the purposes of what I want those to be? If I want to get a group to believe in a certain concept, to understand how they're going to like a certain brand or believe in a certain story, how do you do that? And eventually what you need to do is you need to understand how that individual is going to absorb new things into their lives. How are they going to switch out the decisions that they're taking today for something that is new and exciting for them to be able to deal with their own lives? Because you might not understand each one of those individuals, but how do you bring all of these pieces together? So let's talk it through just by means of analogy and a construct, and I figured that for the industry, maybe this makes sense, that when you make decisions intelligently, the first thing that you think about is you as the human making the decision. So let's just take an example. You drive your motor car down the road, and when you drive it down the road, you use the one big dashboard and the one big pie chart that is probably the most important, and it says speed. And on that speed dashboard, you will decide, when you look at the sign in the distance and it says 55 or 40 or 50 or whatever the speed limit is that you're supposed to adhere to, and you then look at the dashboard and you then adjust based on what you believe the right actions are to take. So what we find in the industry, and you probably do this every single day, you might look at a spreadsheet, you might look at a dashboard, you might look at some analytic, and the interpretation is left up to you as an individual, right? So you still, as a human, have to make the decision. There are no warning signs often, there's no predictive capabilities, because you just don't know how to do that. So the next thing is that we move really in the world of what we call machine-assisted. Machine-assisted is when we talk about predictive capabilities. That means that I drive my motor vehicle down the road, it picks up that there's a radar, or it warns me based on the probability, the fact that previous people who've driven the same path had a fine or had some kind of citation because they exceeded the speed limit, and that means it then gives me a warning. Or there's a motor car that comes from a certain direction, and it provides me with a warning, but the decision is still up to me as the person, as the human. So if we had to take these two phases, and you had to look at the phase that we're moving into, the area we're moving into is to try to now replace the decisions that humans make with some kind of intelligence. Artificial, augmented process, whatever the innovation is that is being used to drive that decisioning is what everybody at the moment is focusing on. So that means that if I'm going to drive down the road and I want to be able to get from point A to point Z or point A to point B, I want to be able to just say to the vehicle, get me there, and it need to do it within the risk profile that I'm in, and I should be able to just get to the destination where all the actions are taken for me. And this is what you see a lot of the AI world is agonizing over. And as we get into the detail, we can get into a bit more of the constructs. Okay, so that's a little bit about just what it is, and we need to have some kind of definition. So what I figured I'll use is at MIT. For those who don't know MIT, it's Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's kind of a big competitor with San Francisco, Stanford. But the point is that a bunch of people sat down and said, well, why don't we come up with a definition of what modern intelligence, artificial intelligence, would look like? And at the end of it, there are a handful of constructs that you always have to think about. The first thing is, it is what we can see. So that means images, videos, or anything that you can see at the moment is an enormous focus. What you can speak or what you can hear, so that means sound. It doesn't matter if it's music or what you say. It doesn't matter if I transcribe meetings or what I'm doing, so that is anything that I say. The next thing is what I can read, and that is text. So that means that if you think of English language, or you look at a local Zulu language or another language, whatever the language is, you want to be able to converse with some kind of machine intelligently if you can read or type something. The next thing is mobility. And mobility is a massive obsession. And in actual fact, the car, as you know it, and especially if you context of EVs that are fully AI enabled, is that the robot, as in a humanoid, is really just a car with a slightly different posture. So that means that the EV inventions that we're seeing, especially in the AI world, to say, how do we turn these into utilities? How do we turn them into something that can clean my home, fix a vehicle automatically, do certain kinds of actions? But then there's a separate class that has emerged, and that is a concept called reasoning. Reasoning is, can I get an intelligence to detect the intent of what I want to achieve, and then go find all the actions needed to get the intent delivered? So if the intent is for me to purchase a new vehicle because I like just new shiny things, or the intent is to purchase a vehicle because I've changed my family situation, or the intent is to purchase it because I want something a bit more sporty, the idea is that in the new agent world, you want to be able to get some kind of intelligence to go scour the world, pick up every possible combination, compare every possible price point, look at every single feature, look at every single finance organization, pick the right finance, get all of those bits for you together, and just say, Jay, you should buy this. And this is where we're ending up. This is what we're aiming at. And this is what I think the entire world, what's called agentic, is busy focusing on. So let's just talk about some of the constructs. The constructs go a little bit like this. And this is some background. I know that maybe a lot of detail, but just for you to kind of have a thinking hook. There was a time before we could read or write, and humans started writing. From the moment we started writing things down, the things that we wrote down had to do with recipes, directions, explanations. We wanted to give cures. We want to explain the world. And that means that knowledge that humans collect over time was documented, and eventually we invented tools to store that knowledge in a product, like paper. So that means to search for anything, to go find anything was almost impossible. The era we then move into now, or the era that we are in now, essentially is that computing has enabled, and that means mass computing through cloud and other kind of capabilities, have enabled us to not just create anything ourselves or to be able to find new lessons from somebody else that have created it, but to combine it in various ways. And the latest wave of invention is what's called generative. And you might have heard the word. All that generative means is that I take an enormously big input, like language or imagery, and I can produce as an output what I received as an input, but I can give it context. And context could be a prompt, or it could be some direction that you give it. So that means that through these cycles of invention, this is not a new concept. In actual fact, AI has been around since the 1950s. I worked in inference through the 90s, the early part of my career. Nobody cared about AI. Now that I've got gray hair and all this, people say, well, you know a little bit about it. Well, I've been coding in this space for the last 25 years because it's been around. It is just now you've got the Goldilocks effect. You've got access to the world's data, and that means that every internet search you've ever done, every website that's available to you today, every Wikipedia, every patent ever filed, every bit of content that has ever been created is accessible to you for free. We have access to almost an infinite amount of compute. That means that you can go and you can look at floating points of operations per second. There are more floating point of operations in computational capabilities today than has ever existed in our very short time of compute. So that means there's an explosion. And that means that we're now moving into an era to say, well, how do I invent tools to extract from this data that was created and was collected some kind of intelligence, and how do I then use it? So the story goes a bit like this. There was a time that if you just stayed alive for long enough, you must have known something than the people that didn't. So that meant that if you stayed around for a while, people would come to you and say, well, how did you do that? How did you survive eating the red berry or the blueberry or whatever the thing is that kept you alive? And that meant that knowledge was centralized around the human. Even language was created like knowledge is power. You've heard that saying before. You know that's obviously long gone. The phase we moved then into was to say, well, hang on, why do we make a few people accountable and responsible for taking the world's intellect and decide on our behalf what's useful? So you had to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, to the science section, and in the science section there was the head of science at the Encyclopedia Britannica, and they decided as an individual what was allowed and not allowed within that volume. And we had enough of that. And actually, humans knew already, and especially as we moved from the 80s into the 90s, that all we wanted was the world to collaborate and to make all kinds of knowledge digital. So that means that if you want to know something, and think about what happened when Wikipedia was launched first, the crisis, what the crisis was. How is it possible there's going to be incorrect details on this platform? That people are not going to be able to maintain it, and yet Wikinomics essentially created a social system that is continuously creating data, including the people that edit the content, that leaves a trail of reasoning behind that can be used in the world that we're in now, what is called AI agents. So an AI agent is that can I gain access to the world's intelligence? Can I gain access to somebody's intent? Can I then go perform a number of actions automatically? And we're basically seeing that we're now in an entirely different space. We are in an entirely new world than what has ever existed. And the reason is because it's embedded. It's embedded in your motor car, it's embedded in your in your electronic capabilities, it's embedded in your phone, it's embedded in your pacemaker, your doctor is using it to diagnose if they don't know what the answer is. It is being used by everybody in every single discipline, basically in existence today. So the question is, why should you care? Now, I know that you've been listening to numbers all day, so maybe just bear with me for a short moment. The first thing is that there's just enormous growth. That means that the compound annual growth in the tech world that's got to do with AI tools, there are probably 50,000 core startups in existence today that are probably valued at about $10 million, $20 million and above, and there are probably 100 plus companies that are valued at $1 billion or more, and there are at least 20 to 50 companies valued at $1 trillion or more because their entire story is based on radical automation using this kind of intelligence. But there is a disconnect between what the promise is and what the expectation is. So that means that startups that we know about and technology companies, and especially in the world of finance and the world of sales and the world of research and the world of new kinds of academic thinking, are now emerging to try to solve some of the areas that we know where there was a mismatch between what people wanted and what eventually was given to them. The parts that are really playing out, things like marketing or messaging or how you're going to deal with customer engagement, is really at the moment a sweet spot, and I'll show you a couple of those examples a little bit later. So the question of where are the areas of impact? What is it going to do to us? And the areas of impact are basically across every single industry. This is a snapshot of a study that was done, and I know that with McKinsey and Company and a few other consulting firms that we work with, they normally conduct these surveys with clients, ours and others around the world. And the key thing that we can see is that in the services sector, there is essentially a massive strategic priority. If you are in high levels of engagement, you definitely want to automate as much as you can because the cost of delivery is so high. In other industries, like in the manufacturing world or in the logistics world or in the supply chain world, all about efficiencies, and that means that dealing with how you deal with alternatives and how you deal with anything that's got to do with calculating how you can make your execution path more efficient. And then there's an adoption by function. And this is the sweet spot at the moment. And that means that in the context of marketing, in the context of product and R&D, and also in the world of how we deal with service delivery. So, I've looked at an example recently. If you had to think about taking a vehicle for a service, all the steps and everything that has to happen by somebody sitting behind a counter, having to type an explanation, or having to find a reason why certain things went wrong, or why certain parts have to be replaced. Imagine that you have an agent that can automatically pick up the intent, automatically describe the remedy, know exactly based on your current capabilities in your shop what can be provided, and then make sure that the communication gets automated. So we definitely see that there's a big focus on various functions, and especially in the world of engagement-related functions. This is probably the most important slide out of this section. And it's most important because in 2017, when the survey was done, and I bet you if we had to do a survey even here, and I had to ask you, what is your view on a machine being able to deal with communicating with you in a natural language, being able to speak to you? How many of you have got voice bots that answer all the questions about your business? How many of you have got voice bots if you want to book a car in for a service? How many of you got voice bots if you want to do any of those actions? How many of you can just track a customer when they do certain things? And later I can demonstrate some of that. We'll get to the end of it and I can explain some of that, how that works. So that means that literally just 3-4 years ago, we thought that this is going to be a 2030 thing. This is going to be a 20, 30, 40-year window. Now people have readjusted their opinions, and they know that it's now. It is available right now. It's available right here, and you can basically execute on it as we speak. And the automotive industry is enormous focus for a lot of these inventions. And as you know, dealer management systems and all of those kind of, especially those, larger software platforms are busy being built to service you better. But this is the debate. The debate is that what is the role of the human in the system? On the one end, we know that if it's human-centered alone or human-centered only, most people want to believe that what they do is uniquely human. And mostly what they will do is they will say to you, it's about the way that you treat a certain customer, the way that I communicate with you, the way that I deal with a complaint. But in most cases, the people that are lodging the complaint, the people that wants to purchase that vehicle, the person who wants to do those things, actually needs efficiency. They need something to happen very, very quickly. They want the execution to take place automatically, and that means on the far right is we're seeing that automating the entire life cycle is what most of the inventions that we know about at least are focusing on. And somewhere in the middle, you have what we call augmentation, and that means human with a tool. And humans are using these capabilities to drive whatever the work is that they're busy doing in their own organizations. So just as some context, you are already, you are already completely exposed to AI. And you probably, if you own a new vehicle, you know that it's there. If you use WhatsApp, you know that voice to text or the ability for you to recraft your messages is now already embedded and deployed. If you use your Microsoft, on the far right, if you use Copilot and you want to send email, you want to summarize documents, you want to review contracts, you want to help it to create presentations for you, those capabilities are all available and they're basically deployed. If you want to use Google and you want to be able to help to figure out what the weather looks like on your map when you travel from one place to another, if you wanted to make recommendations of what to do next, all of those are already embedded within what you are using today. So, how does this work? And what are some of the constructs? What are some of the things that you really want to or might want to understand? So here's an example, right? And the example is that somebody wants to communicate with my organization, and they want to be able to have some first point of contact, and if I have a conversation with somebody, I want to be able to know exactly what was said. I don't just want to record the voice file, I want to transcribe it. Once the voice is transcribed, I want to be able to figure out what the category of challenge was that the customer had a problem with. Did they had a problem with a part? Did they had a problem with something that wasn't delivered on time? Was there something that was late? Whatever the situation is, you want to be able to reliably categorize what has actually happened in the process so that it's not a human where there's human error, but you want to automatically categorize. Once you've categorized it, you want to be able to drive some kind of investigation to maybe pick up from emails or documents or everything else that you've collected in your business, or maybe even look at financial transactions, bring it into a picture, and then be able to form an opinion as to how you're going to deal with any kind of remedy. And by the time you do the remedy, how you then communicate must be able to get done in a way that you can check the quality of the conversation, or at least train somebody new, or maybe even on the fly update your training documentation to make sure that the person who's going to be affected by this downstream does not make the same mistake. Okay, so we're definitely seeing that this is a classical example, but series of steps that get automated. Here's a more complicated scenario, and I'll give you a banking case, and then we can talk about it in the context of your world. So let's say that you speak to a private banker on the phone, and that person has to go and open up your account, and they see that you've got 100,000 transactions sitting in your account. How do they know exactly who you are and what you're doing? In most cases, they would have to first go and analyze it. You would have to maybe speak to them a day later. They would have to run some credit checks. They would have to do a number of things that normally happen offline. So you want to be able to set a journey in motion where automatically it will figure out who the customer is, go and pick up their personality from what it is that they've engaged with historically, have a voice agent that if the customer want to ask questions about what they are going to get involved with, so that you don't just have to do it over text. And eventually what you want to do is maybe then communicate with them over WhatsApp or some kind of digital channel, Telegram, or whatever the technology you're using, so they can ask questions about why is it that my payment did not happen this month, and you want to be able to converse with a bot within what's called a guardrail, where you set the rules of how you're going to execute. And that means that these new kind of what's called agentic journeys, and you're going to see the word agentic or agent-based AI as a massive focus for the immediate future. It's probably the next 10 years is going to be the big focus for how these things going forward. Now, I was worried about putting a slide like this into a storyline for you today, but I figured that it'll just be good for you to understand this is what OpenAI, OpenAI is the company that basically built GPT-based products, or GPT-4 or GPT-3 or whatever the technology is. And you know what GPT stands for? I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Generative Pre-trained Transformer. That's what GPT stands for. So that means that to create a generative model means that I need an enormous amount of data. That means petabytes of data from all over the world. To be able to create a pre-trained model means that I need to take all of this data and squeeze it through a filter so it's usable. And a transformer in the tech world means that I can take all of this capability and I can freeze it in time and allow somebody else to extend it. Okay, so that means that if you want to extend your GPT, you want to extend your Gemini from Google, or extend the technology that you're using, it needs to be created in a way that it can be built on top of. Okay, so this is the typical process, and I just want to give you a glimpse of this. It takes months and months and billions of dollars to train a base model. So that means that companies like OpenAI or even Meta, who spent probably $400 million training small models, or OpenAI is spending $10 billion to train GPT-4, and 5, as you know, is still being trained. It should be out in the next month or so. So that means that they spent billions of dollars because of the cost of computation and the complexity. But then to make it usable to you, there are still humans in the system. There are contractors that have read every single thing that you've ever done with it that basically works through a way in which you can make that conversation useful. And that means that you've got ways of contractors that help with what's called supervised fine-tuning, all the way through to the model where you do what's called reinforcement learning. And that means getting feedback from humans who provide certain kind of context. So that means they are, out of their 5,000 employees, 4,900 and about 50 of those are the humans on the right of the model. The people who actually are the intellectual brain people of who create the models are probably 5 scientists. And this is what's causing confusion in the AI world. is that you need an incredibly small number of team or small number of people that can have an enormous impact in the technological invention space that we're moving into now. And that means that we might end up with the $1 billion company with one employee. Because the obsession in San Francisco is to remove all humans from the execution system and to automate it all with AI basically end to end. What has also got into the picture is something like art or the ability to visualize data. If you look at Rafiq Anadol, who's a pretty well-known visual artist, collects data from around the world, various imagery of, let's say, landscapes, or even he's got a version that's also been done for cars and the evolution of human transportation. And that means that new ways of visualizing this, there's an intersection between how we see the world and how that's going to be used eventually in the context of our artistic output or whatever happens as we move into a new space that we're moving into. Okay, so that's some theoretical background. What I want to do next is take you through 3 waves of cases. And to make it practical, we will start with the very first case that is pretty well known. Most of you might understand it, but I want to give you a glimpse as to how these companies are reinventing themselves. Humans always want new things. We want new shiny things, we want new clothes, we want to try new tools, we want to drive new cars, we want to go to new places to visit when we go on our breaks or on holidays. We want to be able to get out, and that means that there's an obsession with us dealing with that. And that means that the core of this has got to do with media. So let's just think about a company like Spotify. There was a time when music was seen as a product. So that means music was embedded on a device. And if you wanted to understand how many people are consuming what kind of music, what time of the day, under what kind of condition, with what kind of rhythm, what kind of beat, what kind of tempo, you had very little understanding of that. You would have had to do interviews to figure out what those people really wanted or needed. In a new world, what you do is that you take all of what the music world has to offer and you encode it into something that is digital. So that means every single song that gets submitted to their network gets turned into a series of transactions. And those transactions come with a certain signature as to the exact style of that music. It's not just a broad spectrum of maybe 10 or so genres, because Spotify sits with about 70,000 genres, and they sit with 30 plus what's called archetypes, personalities. Now, you as a person consuming content do it either stationary or in motion. So when you're in your motor car and you're playing your music, it knows that you are busy moving, and it knows that you probably will listen to something quite different than if you do it in the stationary space when you listen to music at your office. It also knows that when you listen to music in the morning, or you might listen to music in the evening, or something happens maybe at a get-together at your home, that there are different preferences that change over time, and you, as an individual, basically gets created a signature that is absolutely unique to you as a person. So that means that a hyper-personalized profile for you as a person, hyper-personalized profile for a person make the music, and then what you need to do over time is find the match. This matchmaking is what probably 80% of the AI world are working on today. And that means that can I take more and more and more evidence from various sources, bring them together into a cohesive view to make sure that I can service, I can sell, I can deliver, I can mitigate, I can do whatever I need to do based on who you are as a person. So when you listen to music next time and you change your listening behavior, you'll see that if you're a kind of person that listens to new things all the time, it will recommend new music to you. If you're a person who only has Spotify, they joke, it's the thing, everybody has an 80s playlist. Some just listen to it more often than others. And that means that if you have one and you only listen to certain kinds of music, it means that it will know that maybe your personality is the person that does not like a lot of new things. You like a lot of old. You don't like a lot of new things, and it needs to be careful around how it recommends anything new to you. And it needs to do this automatically. There is no human doing this. The algorithm does the work for you. And that means that by the time you then create an AI that's going to help you with your DJ or help you with profiling your music or your own personal radio station, it focuses on the rhythm, the beat, the tempo, the pace, the various profiles of what you're listening to, but not necessarily the artist or something that was specifically seen in the previous kind of wave of inventions. Now, another way to look at this is that we all, and especially in your world, a lot of what you do is hyper-local. And hyperlocal means that you have a branch, you have humans coming to you, you have a way in which they engage with you digitally, and they have to bring these various components together. So the case that I want to use for this is a case called IKEA that is quite interesting. Now think about IKEA, you've got a journey, and the journey is trying to understand, can I capture what people dream about? And from when they dream about something, can I bring that dream into something to make sure that they can locate the option that they are looking for in the context of my institution? So that means that I need to collect data evidence, and I need the AI to find routes through these various pathways to make sure that I can focus in the right place. And then what I want to be able to do is to say, well, if I know that dreaming is something that people do, and if you think about most vehicles are bought, or some are bought as aspirational products, how do I create the aspiration while making sure that I keep you in the exploration process for me? And once I know that you're in my exploration process, can I target you to sell exactly what you need, not necessarily what you wanted, because there's a big gap between the reality of what you can afford and maybe what you were searching for in the first place. And IKEA has been able to use a number of different inventions to bring these pieces together. So that means if you go and search in a home and you have a certain table or a certain chair or a certain living room and you want to add a product to that, you want to add a chair or a lamp, you can ask it to recommend something that fits within your price bracket, and it will then go find the similarities and make sure that. So that means it uses imagery. If you phone, it will work out if you got certain levels of anxiety and if it needs to recommend somebody to help you to assemble your product. So that means you can bring a holistic picture into the way that you drive your inventions. And eventually what you can do is you can start adding language based on who the people are. And what they've done recently that was quite an interesting campaign was to add humor to some of the products. I guess, some of my favorites, like the top right hand, she gives me mixed signals. You buy a bunk bed. But the thing is that you can come up with different names. You can use linguistic capabilities now far more regularly than what you ever had before to bring some kind of customer specifics together. And this is just an example of how you would compare products. So if you wanted to add a certain chair or you want to bring certain components together, how do you decide what fits and what doesn't? And it must be able to do that for you. And eventually, if you want to ask questions about how can I redecorate my home, you want to be able to upload a picture of what it looks like, potentially use a VR tool to be able to decide how that's going to work, and eventually it must make a recommendation based on what it thinks your style is through a conversational interface. So that means we see the whole engagement style of how we deal with product engagement and selection is going to change quite significantly. So let's just change tack just for a moment. And that is dealer management, and I'm sure that you all already have some kind of implementation of this. These are just a handful of examples of what's available, and most of these might be known to you already. But let's look at one of the first ones. I'm not sure if anybody has followed Autotrader in the UK's new digital invention cycle. So basically it means that you have AI now embedded in almost every single part of the process, and both for the consumer as well as for the retailer. For the consumer, it's got to do with finding out or asking questions without having to go and click boxes and picking to say that I want, this size vehicle, this brand of vehicle, or this, I want a certain kind of sound, system in the car, whatever it might be. You do it through a conversational interface. It then converts that conversation into a taxonomy. That means a set of rules for it to go and find what it needs to find for you to then engage with that, and you can then decide how you then deal with your list of your items that you are interested in. And for the retailer, it's if you wanted to upload 20 or 30 vehicles and you want to be able to describe them properly, what you want to do is take a picture of the vehicle and then ask the AI to describe it. So that means if it has got a special wheel or it's got a certain color or certain additions, you don't want to go do that manually. You want to be able to just take a picture and let it analyze the picture, automatically extract the text, and then do that for you. So we now see that those kind of capabilities are all going to get into the mainstream because most of them are already in the context of the AI world as tools that are available to you. Keyloop is one company that is quite interesting, and they break up the AI into two waves. First wave is how you deal with customers, and that means the ability to keep the person in the funnel. So that means that is there a way that I can drive the sales actions through the funnel to make sure that the person, as they search for alternatives, making sure that I provide the right reasoning based on who they are as an individual. So you detect the personality of the person, You know what is factual in your business and then start matchmaking those two. And then on the right, what you want to do is by the time the car needs to be serviced, you want to combine classical analytic or predictive analytic with a new form of AI. So that means if you know the vehicle needs to be serviced shortly, can I come up with a list of the people that I need to talk to and then use the AI to create the language based on who those people are? And if they provide certain responses, they pay in a certain way, they communicate in a certain way, you can adjust your style of how you communicate with people over time. Numa is a great one because they are probably one of the very few that have built their entire core capability around what's called agents. And that means the first agent is that let's say somebody phones you, and when they phone you, you want to know, they ask about a certain vehicle with a certain specification or a certain year, whatever the vehicle is, and they want to know if you have one. It should have access to your inventory, and through the conversation automatically figure out that this person is serious, and it must automatically then add an entry into the calendar of the person who's then, as a human, if you need the human still, to then communicate with them. If you don't need the human, you might even prepare some of the paperwork, and if you think about all the manual processes that normally go into this thing, you know the steps, there's hundreds of them. And the last thing is, how do you then create loyalty? Because loyalty is about what we call effort in attention. It means that not paying attention to people consistently because it's normally done generically. Can you figure out the sentimental equilibrium? Can you figure out at what level that person would want to communicate with you at, and automatically adjust the language and the communication over time to make sure that they then stay within your particular realm of what you sell? So if they want to upgrade, or they want to cross-sell, or they want to recommend it to somebody else, whatever the scenario is, you're able to find that. Now, one of the companies we found that are probably the most, if I think about it, is most recent, rebuilt from the ground up, is a company called Techion. I'm not sure if anybody here has come across them at all, but they basically retooled their entire core to be an AI-based environment. And the story really goes that the future is not going to be just AI only. It's going to be leveraging. So that means you still need the human to orchestrate the steps, to orchestrate the outcomes, to make sure that the work that needs to be done gets done. But by the time you want to bring it all together, the old way is to say that, yes, I use content, or I create messaging for customers, or I might even have some conversational chatbots. The future is that, can I bolt the conversation into actions? Can I get the actions to automatically go and figure out if there is inventory? If I can automatically initiate a sale, can I go and create the paperwork? If there's a service query, can I figure out what the parts dependencies are, or what needs to be done, what the schedule looks like, slot it into the calendar entirely through a bot kind of interface? And that means that this AI-enhanced teaming is an enormous focus for these kind of companies. And that just means that agents, this data intelligence world, all the way through to the fact that you bring a multitude of different data options into a closed loop to make sure that you can access it through some kind of through some kind of tooling. And this is really the anchor for me. And it's more of a generic example, even though this is from Techion. The top is just to show you how people used to do it. So that means that there's a paper file. I'm not sure if any of you still use paper files, but you've got a paper file with forestry with ink that gets filled in, and it's, as you know, errors, and don't always know exactly what goes on in there, and then you have to go manually capture it, and by the time you want to do anyway, let's not even talk about that. It gets anxiety. And then the second one is when you digitize. So that means that you have a computer system where you've captured things, and once you've captured it, you now have the data, and at some point it gets escalated to a person who is in what's called the management position. Remember those roles? The management position is then accountable to decide on what the actions should be, and if something goes wrong, you've got one person to fire. It's the theory. And as you know, it never quite works like that. So what is the future? The future is that you use agents with a guardrail, that you as an organization take your intelligence and you encode it into a series of actions with a set of rules and heuristics. So that means rules of thumb that you know that you definitely do not want to break, and then some leeway for conversation. So if you wanted to go and do a car registration, you want to pull in some paperwork, there's an address that's missing, you don't want a human to waste time on that. The AI needs to know that do not conclude this phase unless you've acquired the exact documentation, and it has to be approved in a certain way, and validate that it's been approved, and only then tick it before you then bring a human into the system. So we're definitely seeing that agentic journeys or agent-based flows is going to have an enormous impact on productivity going into the future. And even if I look at even in our client base, now we've got a couple of big telco companies and banks and others on the continent, and it's just had an enormous impact on their ability to not just sell, but to service downstream what needs to happen. And this is kind of just, I'll just put this in there. This is what my business does. We do things like spend personality, interaction sciences, intelligent sales. So we really, every single day, deal with clients trying to understand how you make that journey, both on a one end, very guarded, very rule-based, and on the other end, conversational, to make sure that you don't get an AI to make mistakes, because that is what we're all worried about. That's just what we're really scared about. Okay, so that's from a sales point of view, from kind of a dealership point of view. So let's just talk about what happens behind the scenes. And as you know, every major vehicle provider today have got an AI strategy. And actually, I probably should have included, I know that VW and companies like those have already spun out companies to deal with this, and I know that all the organizations that we've spoken to have got pretty big labs, but I just picked a handful of cases that might be worthwhile talking through. So Hyundai is busy with a massive AI initiative to deal with alternative terrain, and especially in regions where the roads are pretty bad. And they've gone so far as to say, well, what if a vehicle is going to go into a mine, or it's going to get into some kind of site where there was a fire or an earthquake, whatever it might be, and it must be able to have the properties of the wheel, that, as you know, is a great invention for moving forward, but also, if you think about the human leg, the ability to lift and to move over obstacles. And they've got a big AI initiative to deal with that. BMW is, and this has been going on for a while, is using AI to be able to predict, all kinds of capabilities of the vehicle, including its, airflow through the vehicle, its heating system inside the vehicle, or the perception of how humans deal with temperature inside the vehicle. And they've got a series of technologies around that. VW and within the Audi stable have been using AI for a while to deal with metals and products and the quality of these various products, and then also to help with remedies. It's a bit like when you think about, like an X-ray of a person's heart or whatever it might be, and you then have an AI that can understand it. And it's the same thing that they're using in the context of cars, the ability to do complex diagnostics. The other thing is that all vehicle companies today are busy with autonomous drive programs. But not autonomous drive as in completely self-drive. Autonomous drive, in most cases, is like a digital twin. A digital twin is essentially a driver in the car that drives it while you drive. And what it does, it calibrates, through this exercise, the personality of the person using the vehicle. So that means that if you are a very aggressive driver, it doesn't have to do anything, but it collects the data. And as you know, all new vehicles today collect data without you maybe even knowing about it. Let's not discuss that, but in your license agreement that you sign with your vehicle these days, you all have probably read your license agreements. It's very, very clear, is that the data that gets collected is owned by whoever pays for it beforehand. So it could be a bank, an insurance company, a manufacturer, whoever that might be. But that just means that self-drive is used as a means to keeping people safe and to be able to deal with urban-related activity that at the moment is quite a big focus. I mean, listen, I know Tesla is probably a sensitive thing for some people at the moment. I'm not sure if Elon is still a good guy here or not, but it's funny because a friend of mine owns a Tesla, and somebody put stickers all over his branding to say that do not park here, even though he was in a public space. So we definitely know this, but their AI team is absolutely phenomenal, because what the AI team has done is not just a self-drive car capability, but it's the ability to bring in all the other sources that you also need into the picture, and I'll show you later a little bit more detail of that. That Jaguar has gone through their redesign. I don't know if anybody followed Jaguar's remodeling and everything. I mean, that's just a fascinating case. What they've done, they essentially retooled the entire factory. They removed about 80% of all the steps in order to produce an EV, and that means that they are now moving into an era of radical simplification and complete and utter automation. So that means the AI needs to deal with the error in the system to deal with how you're going to deal with any of the variances that normally would take place inside a manufacturing scenario. Now, Xpeng is an interesting one. I know that they've got a deal with VW in China, and they're probably one of the very, very few companies who built an AI-based vehicle entirely from the ground up. In actual fact, they train their own base neural nets. They built their own driving capability models. They're busy building a series of mobility tools that are all off the same software platform and the same AI platform in order for you to be able to engage with it. So that means that the device, like your phone or the car that you drive, or if you wanted to go and do, drone-based flying, is going to be probably something that we have to see how it works in the future. But it just means that this new way of dealing with these new age companies that are going to come into the old world is going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on. So think about it this way. Companies and their products and what they do are all versioned in the new world. What does that mean? That means that I take my thinking, and Tesla is probably one of the few who've been able to get this right pretty well with the team that runs Tesla at the moment. And what they do is they create a core platform. So I don't know if anybody has ever seen a version of a software on their phone or on their computer, and you know that it's got 4 parts to it, like 11.4.7.3. It means breakthrough, platform, derivative, support. That's what it means in the tech world. So now, if you want to version your company, you need to version your operating practices, your core technology capabilities, your AI stack, all in one platform. And that one platform uses a breakthrough. The breakthrough is the inventions that have already been created. So in this case, as you know, Tesla 12 was already released. They're working on Tesla 13. Tesla 13's new factories are completely driven by robotics, and there are 2 humanoids. No human is allowed anywhere in the facility at all. Version 11 still had a few individuals or humans that had to deal with certain extraneous related actions. But that means that the entire experience into the future, what we're seeing is going to be the digital device. And it doesn't matter if the car is very cheap or the car is expensive, because what we can see with especially some of the Chinese cars that I looked at since we started this conversation with Nada. I even drove a car called an Eval, I drove a Cherry, I drove all kinds of things that I never thought I'll ever drive, and it's been fascinating. The tech that's available in a lot of these new cars, is just unbelievable. And especially when you then start phoning them and say, well, can I make the following change? I want to configure it in a certain way. And eventually we're going to see that everything will end up being some kind of digital interface. And that means you can provide the parameters of what you want the AI to do in the context of your vehicle or not. The other thing that we're seeing is that everybody will end up with their own data lakes, their own data capabilities, and they will share it with their networks when they resell the car. So every single Tesla vehicle, as it drives, tracks not just the person's behavior in the car, but imagery a few hundred, not millions of times per second because of the frame rate, but it takes frames per second through its entire journey, and every single vehicle in the world gets aggregated into a central space. So Tesla at the moment is probably one of NVIDIA, that's the world's biggest tech company for AI, probably one of their biggest customers. So they spend about $6 billion a year in equipment to train the models that are needed for the cars to operate. And the entire car is purely software configured or configurable. Very few moving parts, nothing to maintain, nothing to service. Everything has become entirely a software-based configuration. And that means that the way that the car behaves, if it's a humanoid or if it's a vehicle, uses exactly the same core technology. And the future is the fact that you might end up having humanoids in your house, or humanoids if you, let's say, you are paralyzed and you want to have a humanoid strapped to the back of your structure, and you want to be able to walk around a city. All those new inventions are basically in motion. They are all driven by some way that you can automate that. Okay, so let's the last stretch. So what I thought we'll do, and we can maybe look at one or two examples, but the first thing is just to look at what a kind of assistant looks like if you wanted to use something that interfaces with some kind of data behind the scenes and get a result back. So here's just an example of, you having a conversation with a chat, and let's say that this chat had access to your company's data, and you want to be able to ask it to retrieve some knowledge about what is already in your transactions or in your financial contracts or in the customers you've spoken to. It needs to provide training for the person using it. So it could be a new salesperson who's not experienced, or it could be a new procurement person, a new finance person. You want to be able to do your entire base of what you know, all the kind of core rules are in your organization. And then what you want to be able to do is then to use this technology to access your data. And when it accesses your data, you want to separate what we call linguistically useful engagements with accurate and precise content. And this is the one thing that hopefully you take away today, and that is that you can't ask GPT or Gemini or or your Claude, or whatever the tool is that you use to give you an answer about your business, because it doesn't know who you are, it doesn't have your data. But in the agent world, you bring these different worlds together. The other thing that happens is that if you now access your data inside your organization, you remove the classical challenge of having to build complex technology for dashboards. And if you think of the role of CRM, let's say, you want to be able to just ask the question, how many customers have I got who have not concluded this deal this month that wanted to buy car X? And it should be able to give you an answer to that. The other thing is that every single human at the moment has access to their own private programmer. And that means that the example now, you see it shows analyzing on the screen. That means that it is writing a program based on an instruction you give it. You have to know nothing about programming. It does it on the fly. And as it does this work, it then needs to produce an output based on the instruction that you've given it. So instead of having to go and explain your problem or building new dashboards, we definitely see that the world's new interface is going to be something that you can ask questions and make it far more conversational. And that means that everybody has access to these kind of skills. And that means that companies like OpenAI with their new agent framework or tooling that they're deploying, Claude with Anthropic. Anthropic is probably one of the world's best voice-based technologies if you want to have voice interactions. If you look at Grok, in some cases for a bit of entertainment. Are there anybody here that use Grok? Oh, have you used Grok rude mode? Not yet. Conspiracy theory mode? Oh no, listen, it's fascinating. I mean, obviously, Alan has given our team a pretty good brief. And if you wanted to figure out every single conspiracy theory, go to Grok. This is Alan's business. But if you go ask it, and you put it into conspiracy theory mode, that I think it's only on the app, it's not on the web, and you ask it to do something. It's also got a rude mode that you have to make sure you're on your own because it can get pretty rude. It can swear and it calls you names and the like. So that just means that we don't quite know where the limits of a lot of these technologies are. And the challenge is the data that it was trained on needs an enormous amount of work. And we're seeing that we're not going to touch that in the enterprise. You're going to keep your existing data, the transactional data, the conversational data, the contracts, the paperwork that you have, and you want to be able to bolt tools on top of that and then provide capabilities so that people can start using that. So what I thought I'll do, if you're interested to test a voice bot, should I do a quick demo? Maybe to show you how this kind of thing will work. I just want to check that my computer, if we switch to that, I might need the sound as well. Just to, if we can do that, I can just show you what. I'll tell you what, you might be able to hear it. I can hear it somewhere here. Somebody's obviously clicked on it. Is there a way to get my sound delivered? Then I can. Otherwise, I can explain to you what it does. Should I try it again? I'll tell you what. Let me disconnect this and see if the microphone picks it up. It should be able to pick it up.
Hello, thank you for considering Ecosystem. How can I assist you today?
You all heard that? Hey, I'm Jay. I want to buy a car and I need some help.
It sounds like you're looking for something to help with your car business. Are you looking for ways to better understand your customers' behavior and tailor your interactions with them?
Yes, please.
We have a solution that can help with that. Our interaction science module uses real-time behavioral predictions to drive customer interactions and interventions. It can help you select the best engagement style for different personality types.
Okay. So how would you do that from an implementation point of view quickly?
From an implementation perspective, our platform is available on the Azure and AWS marketplaces, making it easy to integrate with your existing systems. Our partners provide sales, technical, and implementation services.
Okay, I think that was just a demo. Thank you. Goodbye.
I'd be happy to arrange a demo for you. Before I do, can you tell me a bit more about what you're hoping to achieve with our interaction science module?
I need to go now.
It was nice speaking with you. If you're interested in learning more about our interaction science module, you can visit our website Ecosystem.
So basically, think about the construct for a moment, is that real-time based interfaces or real-time interactions is, where we see the world going. And that means real-time intelligence, real-time translation, real-time voice, real-time conversations, real-time multimodal, the ability to understand if there's a certain situation. I mean, one of the ones that I've been using is in my car, you run a dash cam with one of the new Google videos. It picks up continuously what's in the road and everything, and it can explain things to you wherever you drive, or it can, even if you just point it at a certain building, it brings in the descriptions into the final way in which you obviously can describe things. Anyway, that was just a quick view. The other one is just, if you want to think of an advisor, if you scan this QR code, what you will see is that there's another assistant on OpenAI. And what we've done is taken a bunch of companies' annual reports. We've taken a lot of the NADA's details, and it's got the intelligence base of a lot of what goes on in a region. And you can ask it questions also about what's called an archetypal-based system to figure out how you can service customers better. I know some of you, maybe you just want to, if you want to scan that. So AI is really good at analytical-based problems, especially if there's fuzziness in the system. So that means working out how customers have communicated with you over time, what kind of things they bought or not bought, and you want to help or get assistance from that to be able to describe what to do next. This kind of tool will help you with that, and you can give feedback to NADA, and we'll make sure that we make some more updates to it later on. But let's just think about this for a moment. If you want to speak to any one of these kind of groupings, they are called archetypes. So what is an archetype? An archetype is like a segment, and each segment has got its own language aspirations, potential products that they want to buy, price ranges with which they want to engage in. So if you're a budget-conscious pragmatist, you are very different than a premium lifestyle seeker. And if you ask that GPT questions about that, it will explain to you how you communicate with these people, what you can say to them, how you can engage with them better. Also, if you want to then provide your own data, you'll see that there's an upload button at the bottom that you can use. You can maybe take a spreadsheet of the last years with the sales and ask it to go figure out what the archetype is of this particular person if you want to sell maybe to somebody again over a period of time. So we're just seeing that these kind of tools are pretty low-hanging fruit. They are easy to implement. They're very accessible, and especially in the context of the public tooling that is available today. Anyway, I think that's it from my side. The idea was just to give you a brief journey of the innovation in this space. I know that if there are AI people in the room, you know that I've only covered the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things to talk about in this discipline, but it just means that you probably want to understand what's available and how it can assist you, because we're definitely not seeing that it's going to slow down. We just see an enormous wave of new inventions coming to market that's going to hopefully make your lives better and easier. So that's it from my side. Thanks.